The Smashing Machine was one of my most anticipated movies of the entire year, and even though I'm not the most knowledgeable guy when it comes to the UFC, I do love me a pretty good sports movie. Dwayne Johnson is a guy that is definitely capable of being a really good actor when he wants to be. If you haven't seen Michael Bay's Pain and Gain, I definitely recommend you check that out. It's probably his best performance up to this point so far, at least, and a lot of that has to do with the types of projects he's picked over the past decade of his career. And just based off the press tour interviews he's been doing for the Smashing Machine, he seems pretty self-aware of this. He wants to start making more art type of movies, or at least movies that aren't like Red Notice and whatever the fuck the Christmas one is with Chris Evans. It's literally called Red One. That's crazy that he has Red One and Red Notice in his filmography. It has been quite a terrible pick of movies, but he seems pretty aware of this. And when you pair him up with one of the Safdie brothers, who are two of the more interesting and talented filmmakers we have that are up and coming right now, they're behind some recent hits like Good Time and Uncut Gems. So when you have at least one of those brothers collaborating with you, I would say you're in pretty good hands. There's just a lot of ingredients going into this that makes it feel like that this biopic of Mark Kerr, who is one of the more legendary figures in UFC history, it should be one of my favorites of the entire year. And I got to see this earlier than a lot of people. I went to the Toronto International Film Festival this year, where I got to catch one of the very first screenings of this movie, and Benny Safdie even showed up, did a little Q&A after, so I got a lot more insight into how the film was made, and just gave me a week to get all of my thoughts together. And as I keep sitting with this movie, it is a film that I have a pretty complicated relationship with. There's a lot of things I like about it. There's a lot of things I really don't think work all that great. And it's one I'm curious to see how the public reacts to. This is not really your typical sports biopic, and I don't know if I'm saying that in a good way, but there are a lot of things that are really good about this movie, especially The Rock's performance. You know, Mark Kerr is a guy I know relatively nothing about, if I'm being honest. I thought about watching the Smashing Machine documentary before watching this fictionalized version of the movie, but I decided to go into this pretty blind and give you that perspective of somebody that knows nothing about this guy. And what I got is what is kind of implied from the trailer that's out there. It's this guy who was such like a maniac within the ring in terms of the brute force this guy brought to the sport. Like some of the fight scenes in here, you're like, holy shit, I can't believe that they do this. Like I know how brutal the UFC is now, obviously, but there's a scene in this movie where they show off some things that became illegal in the sport, and you're like, holy shit, like these guys were unbelievable in this time period. But outside of the ring, he's this more like tender human being. Teddy Bear is probably not the best comparison, but he's just not the hothead you would think he is when he's in the arena. And I think Dwayne Johnson is kind of the perfect person to cast in this movie. I know he takes a lot of shit for being not the best wrestler turned actor out there. A lot of people say Dave Bautista and John Cena have just done a lot better, but I don't think either of those guys. I'm a bigger fan of Bautista than these two guys in terms of acting. And I think Bautista with The Last Showgirl last year especially showed he has a lot of range. So it's more compared to John Cena. I don't think Cena could really pull off a role like this. I could be wrong. I would love to be proved wrong, but The Rock just embodies Mark Kerr the entire film. You could tell he really cared about telling the story. He's the one that brought Benny Safdie the story and said, I want to do this movie. So clearly he has been passionate about telling the story for a while. And I think he pulls it off. I think he's really authentic as Mark. I think he has a lot of scenes where he gets to show off how good of an actor he is. He fully commits to the prosthetic makeup. I think the makeup is pretty underrated because The Rock is one of those movie stars that seems like he would be kind of not okay with fully committing to a role like this. I know that sounds bad. I know every actor should do that, but a lot of these movie stars don't. And I think The Rock was in a way categorized like that for a while, but he fully commits here. And I think he deserves credit for that. I don't think he's like this extraordinary performer in this movie. Like in terms of, is he worthy of winning an Oscar? For this movie, I would say no. I have a higher standard for people. There are years where it's not as competitive. It seems like this is a pretty competitive year. So this is one of those areas where if he got nominated, I wouldn't be upset. I think he would be worthy of a nomination, but I do think he'd probably be in like, if there's 5 nominees for Best Actor, I would put him in like the 4th or 5th spot, maybe 3rd, depending on how the year plays out. But it's not a role I walk out of and say like, man, this guy deserves an Oscar. You know, when I walked out of Hamnet, which is a movie I will talk about later on this channel. But coming out of that, I was like, oh yeah, Jessie Buckley is fucking incredible in this. She obviously deserves to win Best Actress. Wish I could get to that level with The Rock here, but I do think he is objectively very good. And another performer that is also really good here is Emily Blunt, which doesn't come as a shock to me. I think Emily Blunt has been consistently one of the best actresses we have working today. And this performance is no different. A lot of people don't like how her character is written. It didn't really bother me. I think she gets the most out of her character. And if anything, like I kind of had a warning about her because I was talking to my dad who read a book about Mark Kerr. And the only thing I knew going into this movie was Emily Blunt's character is quite a character, to put it lightly. And she has a lot to do in his life and a good amount in the movie. And I think the strongest moments of the film are anytime her and The Rock are having some sort of argument. It just feels really authentic. It's when you get the most out of their performances. Like if they're gonna show a clip at the Oscars, if either of these two get nominated, the clip will probably involve an argument between the two of them at some point. That is the parts of the movie that are strongest. That's the parts of the performances that are the strongest. And Benny Safdie brings up that these two are the only like real quote unquote actors in the movie. Everyone else is a bunch of people that don't really have a lot of acting experience. And you can't really tell while watching the film. I think one of the strongest things about, I'm assuming both the Safdie brothers, but it's especially Ben Safdie here because it's his movie, is that they just get the most out of their actors, especially when they're people that don't have a lot of experience acting. He's just somebody you could tell is making everybody behind the camera comfortable because you know he's probably going to get the best out of The Rock and Emily Blunt, but the fact that he could get the best out of just some random guy, you know, or a UFC fighter is very impressive. And I think is a skill that most directors should have, but I think it is clearly an X factor that either just Benny or I'm going to assume both the Safdie brothers do have. I also think the cinematography as a whole is pretty impressive for multiple reasons in this movie. This is the first film that was shot fully on 16mm that was optimized for IMAX. It's apparently the first movie to ever do this. At first in my head, I was trying to think like maybe First Man, but the difference is First Man had a lot shot in 16mm and then had a lot of those moon sequences just shot on straight up IMAX. So I guess that's the difference here. And I was lucky enough to catch the one screening at TIFF that was on the IMAX screen. So I got to have the, I guess, experience you're supposed to have while watching this movie. And I think the actual look of the film is really good. I think the 16mm really works. I think maybe it doesn't need to be in IMAX, but I thought it was cool to watch in IMAX. I think one thing that this and another film, Christie, have in common that also played at TIFF is that there isn't really a huge focus on the fighting itself. Like there's definitely parts of the film where it does, but a lot of this is just following the character. So it feels like a use of IMAX like how Nolan used it for Oppenheimer, where it's not necessarily showing a lot of action set pieces, but I still think it looked really good. It also has this very deliberate documentary-esque type of shooting, which sometimes could get kind of gimmicky. I have not seen The Curse yet. I've heard nothing but great things about it. It looks like Benny teamed up with the DP of that show, and they do a really good job here. It never feels like too gimmicky or that the camera is trying to show itself off. You know, it just feels like you are watching real people during this real time period. I think if the Smashing Machine is really strong at anything, it's the performances and the way they are documenting the story. And Benny Safdie is definitely a talented director. You know, whether it's him by himself or him with his brother, the guy has some talent. He's got way more talent than me. But when I get to the problems of this movie, I think just from the second it starts, it feels like there's this lack of energy. It just doesn't feel like there's genuine passion behind this. Like when Benny was talking about the film, he talked about how The Rock did bring it to him, that The Rock is the one that really wanted to tell that story. And I think through Dwayne's performance, you could see that. And when Benny was talking about it, he was like, oh man, like when I was being described this story, like I saw so much of myself in Mark and I knew I wanted to tell this story. And he didn't seem disingenuous when he was saying that, you know, like you could tell he felt like he wanted to make this movie, but I just don't think it really translates on screen here. There's never any like rhythm to the storytelling that feels good. There's no energy in a lot of the scenes, and a lot of the sequences just feel like they're kind of being stitched together to make like a movie because they have to make a movie. It's just building up to a point where you think you know where the movie's going and it doesn't go there. And I don't think that's necessarily an issue. I think there is an interesting theme that they're trying to get across and how a character like Mark would deal with this kind of situation. But at the same time, you have to fill in the gaps with other interesting things. And I don't think the Smashing Machine does that. And it's hard to talk about those things without not spoiling anything. And I'm not going to spoil the film for anybody that hasn't seen it and doesn't know Mark's story. But it just feels like this movie is a little over 2 hours, and it feels like there should be a third hour of movie in here. And you feel that in different parts of the storyline. Like, it's not just that there should be another 30 minutes at the end or anything, which I think there probably should be. It's just that there's so many moments that aren't as fleshed out as they could be. Like, there's this part where Emily Blunt leaves the movie for a while and you don't really know if she's going to come back in the movie. And then she just kind of shows up out of nowhere. And it feels like there should have been some build up to that moment in some sort of way, or there should have been at least one more conversation before that. It's just kind of jarring. And there's a lot of moments in the movie where I feel that way. And like I said, when it comes to doing a biopic, you are kind of cornered into telling the story in a very specific way if you're being authentic to how the story played out in real life. And it definitely has something to do with the time period they choose to tell this story in. I didn't write down the exact time frame, but I want to say this entire story takes place within like a 4 or 5 year time span. And maybe there just wasn't anything else that happened in that time that they wanted to include in that story, which is fine. But maybe just expand the time frame, you know, do a little bit earlier, a little bit later, because by the end of the movie we are shown, I didn't think there was a payoff of me sitting there for 2 hours. There just doesn't really seem to be a huge point to the entire thing besides it's okay to lose every once in a while, even if you can't handle losing well, which is fine. I don't need every movie I watch to have like a main thesis and build a story around that. A lot of my favorite movies are hangout movies where it's a bunch of characters getting together, doing a bunch of nothing. They're just talking about life and the entire film like amounts to nothing. I'm cool with that, but there has to be interesting things within the 2 hours that keep my attention or just make me excited to talk about it. And this just feels like a couple sequences that are just kind of taped together and you're supposed to feel things emotionally, but I never got close to feeling anything in this movie. I never really cared about anything going on. Like there are some interesting things you could tell happened in this guy's life and he's truly like an incredible person, clearly, but I just never got there. Like as an audience member, I never really cared. I hated the ending. I'm not going to talk about it, obviously, because I know I'm lucky that I got to see this before a lot of you, but when it happens, it is just done in such a corny, cornball ass fucking way that I want you to imagine me sitting there in the theater next to you, because as soon as it happens, like it's already kind of corny to start, and then they end it with a line. I would just look at your ass. Like if you're sitting next to me, I would look over and I would just look at you dead in your eyes like this, like what the fuck are we doing here? This is a terrible decision. Like I don't hate the idea. I think the idea is interesting, but they executed it in the dumbest fucking way possible. Like I said, Mark Kerr seems like a wonderful human being and he is clearly a legend in the sport, but by the end of this movie, I asked myself, why does this movie even exist? What did I learn? And I learned absolutely nothing. Like I mentioned before, I saw the Christy Martin biopic called Christy, starring Sydney Sweeney, also at this film festival. And although they tell very different stories, that movie feels like a complete movie. It's literally 12 minutes longer than this movie, and I feel like I learned everything I possibly could about Christy Martin. These are two people I knew relatively nothing about. And by the time the credits rolled on that one, I was like, oh, I know why she deserved a movie, because this story needs to be told. And Mark Kerr probably deserves a movie. I just don't think this movie proved that he needed a movie. And The Smashing Machine definitely has more style to it than Christy, especially the way it's shot. It's a more impressively done film. But style should be like icing to a great cake. That's why some Wes Anderson movies hit better than others. He has the best icing in the world. Doesn't mean the cake is always good. And I think the cake of The Smashing Machine is good. It is a solid movie that I enjoyed watching a lot of. It just feels like we took the cake 20 minutes early out of the oven. It tastes raw when you bite into it. I decided I'm going to bring back ratings to this channel. It gives you something to look forward to. A lot of people are going to hate my ratings. That's fine. I don't care. I think since the days of IGN, we have inflated scores for everything. So I'm going to tell you The Smashing Machine is a 5 out of 10. I think it is a very okay movie with a lot of things going for it. I think I had this at a very low 6 for like the week I was in Toronto since I saw it. But the more it sits with me, the more I like flesh out my thoughts about it. There's just like not a lot of things I enjoy about it. I dislike it more than a lot of the movies I ended up seeing at the festival. And I just feel like if this came out this time next year in 2026, we would have had a more complete film and it could have been in the conversation of my top 10 movies of the year. But if you ever played like Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain, you're like, man, this is a great game. And I think it's a greater game than this is a good movie. But like there's literally the ending section missing. And The Smashing Machine is the closest I've felt to playing playing that game. If you like this review or just me in general, I have a lot more TIFF reviews coming out. I saw almost all of the big hits. I saw Knives Out 3, Hamnet, No Other Choice, Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. I've seen them all. I'm going to talk about all of them on this channel, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of those. And I will be talking about that biopic of Chrissy Martin because I think it is the better of the two sports fighting movies that I saw this year. So like I said, be sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss any of those. And this is Chase. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I hope you have an awesome day. Thanks.